Hello everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the G-Spot. I'm Gila Zak, certified hypnotherapist, and today is our final episode on the E&P Emotional Sexuality series. I just want to preface this episode by saying that I'm going to be talking about sex and fantasies and things that are a little bit more explicit in nature. So if this isn't your cup of tea, then join me next week for an entirely new video. If I've piqued your interest at all, come a little closer. This is going to be a very tasty episode. So in previous episodes, I've talked about the unconscious motivations, drives of what moves us in a relationship. But when we are in the bedroom, when we're experiencing sex with our partner, so often people will say to me, Gila, how is it that you know what I'm thinking? How is it that you know what I'm feeling? How is it that you know what I may be fantasizing about? And that is because as an unconscious behaviorist, it is my job to know what drives people to do what they do and feel what they feel. Now let's recap for a moment briefly. We know that unconsciously, and even consciously at times, the physical wants to be the dominant personality in the relationship. And very often, the emo is going to be a bit more submissive. They're going to acquiesce. Fine, honey, you pick the restaurant, you pick on the menu, you decide where we're going for vacation. The emo is going to allow that dominant physical to be dominant to a point. So how does this play out sexually? Well, first of all, we need to understand that there is a shit ton of conditioning that comes from society, culture, religion, family of origin that tell us what is right and what is not right when it comes to being our sexual selves. They'll tell us that something is perverse or that it's deviant or that it's just flat out wrong. But the truth is, if we are entering into a sexual experience with somebody that is consensual, where everybody is free to express their needs, wants, and desires openly, where their boundaries are respected and they understand that consent can be withdrawn at any time, and everyone ends feeling satisfied and respected, this is how it should be. But how does this play into fantasy? Now, let's just say we have this very dominant physical sexual, and in the bedroom, they are the ones who are usually initiating sex. They're usually in dominant sexual positions. They're usually the ones who, again, want to control the sexual experience. And I'm not talking about malicious, violent, or inappropriate control. I'm just talking about directing the scenes, right? Sometimes you can find this physical sexual has a fantasy of being a submissive. And what this would look like is that there might be times that in their mind, if they have a very submissive partner that they know can't meet them being a dominant personality in the bedroom, they will then fantasize in their mind while they're having sex that they are in the submissive position as a way to create that sexual arousal that they might need in a particular instance. It doesn't mean that they're doing this all the time. It just might be something that they do on occasion to kind of spice things up for themselves. Or if they feel that they really want to have this physical connection with their partner, they need it, but maybe their physical body is a little bit tired and they need a little extra energy to get there, they're going to use these fantasies to help them get where they need to be sexually. The other thing that we'll see is very often we have the emo who is often the more submissive partner in the relationship sexually. Now, this emotional sexual, they might appear submissive, but perhaps for them, they have a fantasy of being dominant. Maybe they don't know how to speak up in real life for themselves, or they were taught that they need to be seen and not heard. Maybe it's cultural, maybe it's just social, or maybe they just prefer to take the back seat during the day, but in the bedroom they have a fantasy of being in the driver's seat. This is where we'll often see an emotional sexual, male or female or anyone in between, have fantasies of being the more dominant one, being in more dominant positions or expressing themselves in more sexually dominant ways. It's important to recognize that however we fantasize, it's because we're looking for a feeling of sexual safety. And there was an incredible book that was written on this. It is called Arousal, The Secret Logic of Sexual Fantasies. And it's a wonderful way to look at why would someone have a particular fantasy about this, that, and the other. Initially, it might seem strange, perverted, weird, and downright fucked up. But the idea is that nobody really wants to do that in real life. Well, most people don't. They're called fantasies for a reason, right, people? And so when we go into our head and have these fantasies, it's creating the illusion of sexual safety in the privacy of our own mind that allow us to engage in the sexual experience in a heightened or very satisfying way. So here's an example of a fantasy for a highly sexual, dominant physical. And this person has a lot of physical energy, a lot of sexual energy. And maybe they are pleasuring themselves, or they're with a partner, and their partner, again, is likely to be someone a little less physically, sexually dominant. So in their mind, they might be fantasizing about being with 2 people at the same time, maybe even 3 people at the same time. And here's what's happening. They are the center, the complete focus of all the sexual attention and affection. They have this really strong sexual energy. And in the fantasy, they don't have to worry about being too much for the partner, because there's more than one person to meet their level of sexual energy. So you might start being able to see that you can put the pieces together of why some of these fantasies really work. They help a person to realize, I'm okay with the sexual energy that I have, and that I can use these fantasies in order to meet myself in this wonderful play space where nobody's getting hurt, everything is consensual, it's all fantasy and play, and why, it's just quite tasty, isn't it? Now let's flip this on the other side just a little bit. Let's say you have an emotional sexual who has negative body concepts. They don't feel good about their body, their appearance. They feel a lot of shame in even wanting sex. They feel shame in wanting to be a sexual person because of whatever their conditioning was. They might fantasize with being with more than one person for a completely different reason. For them, it is affirming that they are desired. It's affirming that they are beautiful. It's affirming that they are everything that they could be, to arouse not just one person, but 2 or 3 or 4. It's very common for an emotional sexual to have a fantasy that they are in the center of a circle or a space of voyeurs who are seeing them enjoying themselves, pleasuring themselves, or with someone else. Again, this is a fantasy. This is reinforcing the sexual safety that says, I am desirable enough because look, all these people are sexually aroused by me. So you might be starting to see in this instance why fantasy plays an important role for the emotional sexual who probably doesn't feel as comfortable with their sexuality, their body, or maybe they need a little extra oomph to get their sexual energy to come to the surface. And again, these people, they generally don't want to have these experiences. This is just fantasy. So the main thing that I want you to understand about fantasy is that we all have them for the most part. There are people who will tell me, Gila, I don't fantasize. And that's okay too, because everything is normal. What works for you, works for you. What doesn't, that's okay. And the whole idea behind this is, how can I help you as an unconscious behaviorist recognize that in situations like this, there's nothing wrong with you for wanting to explore these fantasy ideas that can help you to feel a feeling of sexual safety with your partner that allow you to get into the experience more erotically. Another person who I really admire and respect in the way that she presents sexuality and intimacy is Esther Perel. And I really encourage you to look for her books, look for her videos, and really dive deep into what she puts forward to help people. I just want to pull these few little pieces out because I think that as a hypnotist, I use them in my practice daily, and I want to share them with you now. When it comes to our intimate partner relationships, we know that in the beginning, there is this limerence period, right? Where our hormones are playing a big role in our sexual desire and the flow. And then when we settle into the day-to-day, we can find ourselves where things are kind of shaken out and maybe sex isn't a priority, or we have to put it on the back burner. Where fantasy comes into play is that it gives us a space within our head to experience private, personal thoughts that are titillating or arousing, and they might even seem a bit strange. But in the bigger picture of things, what they're doing is they're giving us a context for where we can begin to experience a place to let go and to allow our sexual energy to flow more freely. Before we go any further, I want to make something really clear here. When it comes to fantasies, we are the writer of the script, we are the main character, the actor, and we're directing the scene. This means that we are in control. And this is what allows us to enter into the space knowing that we're safe, okay? We are in control. And this is the premier thing that we need to understand with fantasies, and why we can have some very unusual ones that may seem strange to some people and perfectly normal to others. Because the truth is, people, In our fantasies, we're the ones in control. Now, if you haven't already, I really encourage you to explore the work of Esther Perel. What I absolutely love about the information she puts forward is she normalizes the fact that our intimate partners are not supposed to fulfill every role in our lives for us. They're not supposed to be our partner in business, our co-parent, our sexual lover, our householder. They're not supposed to hold all these roles for us. They're not supposed to be everything to us. That's a fuck ton of pressure to put on anybody, right? And it's going to make the physical feel more insecure. It's going to make the emo feel more pressured. But when we go into fantasy in our life, this is how I know that if you tell me the way that you were loved, these are her words. Tell me the way you were loved, and I will tell you the way that you need to be loved. And how this plays out in fantasy is really important, because in the privacy and safety of your own head, you can start to create scenarios that allow you to explore feelings that feel safe to you to be present in your partner, with your partner. And sometimes people will say to me, Gila, isn't this kind of like being rude or mean or dissociating from our partner when I should be really, really connected with them? And what I want to say to you is, most people that I talk to, almost everyone, and I talk to a lot in this area, will tell you they're not fantasizing throughout the entire experience with this stuff. They're using it as the precursor. They're using it as the initial dance. They're using it into the space to get into the sexual trance with their partner. Or maybe in a peak moment where they feel they really need to attach and really build up an extra sensory feeling in their body, they'll pop into this fantasy for a moment as a way to take themselves over the bridge and into orgasm. And again, it's all about creating a feeling of sexual safety with using fantasy. If we feel like our sexual energy is too much or too little in some context, we can use fantasy as a way to bring us into that place of balance so that we can be more present, loving, and passionate with our partner. So to wrap this up, if you are an emotional or physical sexual and you're experiencing pressure or insecurity or some type of big disparity in the way that you think and feel in your body and show up in your relationship, find yourself a wonderful, experienced, qualified hypnotist who can help you pull the weeds in the garden of your sexual experience so that only the good and delicious and juicy fruit can grow. If you found this content curious and interesting, please like, subscribe, and share. Any comments or questions, please leave them below. I always welcome the opportunity to expand upon this topic because it's really big, isn't it? Especially the topic that we talked about today. I want to thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time on the G-Spot.